I do view China as a potential military threat. They've indicated that they're trying to develop nuclear capability, and they want to develop more aircraft carriers like we have.
Well, China has had nuclear capability since 1964, and of course they always want to develop better technology for the delivery of nuclear weaponry, weaponize their nuclear capability and so forth, but that to me didn't seem right. One woman who would know a little bit about this is the author of the new book, soon to be a big smash, No Higher Honor, a memoir of my years in Washington, former Secretary of State under George W. Bush, Condoleezza Rice. Secretary Rice, how are you? Great to talk to you again.
Hi, Laura. It's great to talk to you.
What do you make of that comment? Is that accurate, what he said about China?
Well, no, clearly he misspoke. It is obvious that China is increasing its military capability. They've built an aircraft carrier for the first time, and that sort of thing. They have been a nuclear power for quite a long time. As a matter of fact, that's one reason that they are grandfathered under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, because they were a nuclear power before that treaty came into being. So, but look, people misspeak, and not everybody's a foreign policy expert going into a presidential campaign.
Does it concern you, though, that somebody who's at 30% in the polls, Mitt Romney's at 23%, doesn't know that basic fact at this point? That's not an issue that you think they should know at this point?
Well, let's give it the benefit of the doubt and say maybe it was misspoken. But obviously, if you're going to run for president, you're eventually going to really have to know these things because China is a big challenge out there in a lot of important ways, including militarily.
We're going to get more into the China issue from your memoir in a few moments. We'll just leave this Herman Cain issue after this point. Herman Cain had made the comment in an interview, I believe it was on Fox or maybe PBS as well, about that some of this, in response to a Krauthammer point he made, some of this might be about race, and he said, well, I'm not sure, I don't have proof, but it could very well be grounded in race, this recent controversy. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I don't much like the race card on either side, Laura. I don't like it when people say that the reason people are criticizing President Obama is because he's black. They're criticizing him because he's president, and some people don't like his policies. And I think we all do a little bit better if we don't give in to the kind of race card, because what is it ultimately? It's ultimately a sense of kind of aggrievement. They're treating me badly, and we all have to take responsibility and try not to give in to that kind of aggrievement.
Yeah, but I worked for Clarence Thomas, as you might recall, and look, I do think it is extremely difficult in the United States oftentimes for black conservatives, especially men.
Yeah, that's a different issue, and I think you're right that it's sometimes difficult for black conservatives because it's a funny thing. There's this idea that somehow it's okay to know how a black person is supposed to think, and to for you, whether you are white or a self-appointed black leader, to know how that person is supposed to think. To my mind, that's the highest form of prejudice, because you wouldn't do that to a white person. And so there's something very prejudiced going on there. And I always said, when people say something about being a black conservative or black Republican, how could you? I say, I think for myself, and by the way, I have been black all my life. I don't need anybody to tell me how to be black.
Well, it's always great to hear from my listeners, Secretary Rice, and I have listeners across the political spectrum, believe it or not, and a lot of them happen to be black, and it's just hilarious when they'll call in and they'll say, first of all, we are traditionally a conservative people, so this idea that somehow we became liberal and the government's going to help us, well, our family was strong, our father was there, and we grew up with right and wrong and a moral core, and that's what we need to get back to. I hear that all the time.
Well, my dad is, I remember, was a Republican from 1952 on, so I come by this in a natural way. And I do think that in at least the black community, there are voices that are talking about the importance of not being aggrieved, not being entitled. My parents used to tell me, you will have to work twice as hard, and that was said as a matter of fact, not a matter of debate. And we all worked twice as hard. We did pretty well, but we do have to recognize that for a lot of kids, and not just minority kids, poor kids, the state of our K-12 education system is depriving them of opportunity. And that's where we need to be focusing our energies on making sure that poor parents have choice, that they're not locked into bad schools. In that sense, education really is a civil right. You can't guarantee equality of outcome, but you ought to be able to guarantee equality of opportunity.
We're talking to former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Her new book, No Higher Honor, is our featured selection on lauraingraham.com. So you can go there, or any bookstore that's left in the United States. Barnes & Noble, Borders is out. Barnes & Noble or on your Kindle or on your Nook and download it. This is a big book, and part of what you write about is your experience, of course, with dealing with Hamid Karzai. And I was reading about the one meeting you had where he took the opportunity to basically accuse the UK and even maybe the United States of trying to oust him as the leader of Afghanistan. And looking back on all of this and hearing what he said recently, Secretary Rice, that if there's a war broke out between Pakistan and the United States, he would side with Pakistan. Right. After we've had all this enormous loss of life and American casualties in Afghanistan. Do you have any regrets regarding our alliance with Hamid Karzai?
I don't regret the alliance. I mean, let's remember, he was a brave man who almost died in the early stages of Operation Enduring Freedom because he actually got caught behind the lines, and we had to help rescue him. So he did a brave thing in help liberating his country from the Taliban, which we needed to do because we needed to deal with that safe haven of al-Qaeda that was still operating in Afghanistan. But he is a mercurial figure, and he says things sometimes, I think, thinking that one audience will hear them. So he probably said the Pakistan thing to appeal to sort of the Pashtun ethnicities, but he forgets that in modern times that's heard worldwide. So he is what he is, but there are a lot of worse possibilities in Afghanistan, and I think we just have to keep close to him, keep working with him, and hold him accountable when he says things like that.
In Afghanistan, if you had to grade our progress in Afghanistan today, this on the heels of that most recent blast just 3 or 4 days ago in Kabul, where we had 12 Americans die, right. And other some were contractors, GIs, and other foreign workers as well, and some Afghanis dead. Devastating attack on that bus. By the way, Hamid Karzai did not even refer to the American casualties in his initial comments. No reference at all to them. But given what we've seen in the recent weeks in Afghanistan, how would you grade our progress?
Well, the progress is, I would say, almost stalled, it seems. I actually was fairly hopeful a few months ago. It looked like we were making some gains. But look, we have to keep our eyes focused on what it is we need to achieve.
What is it do we need to achieve, Secretary Rice? Because the country wants us to get out of Afghanistan.
I understand that, Laura.
And I understand that sentiment very strongly now.
I certainly do, too. But first of all, leave an Afghan force that's capable of preventing an existential threat to the Afghan government. That means getting it overthrown. Do what you can in terms of decent governance in the provinces in particular. Maybe focus a little less on Kabul. And Laura, the real problem is Pakistan. The Afghan situation was going relatively well until the Pakistanis made some really bad decisions in 2006, and they really let the terrorists burrow in those ungoverned spaces between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I actually think we've got as big a problem with the Pakistanis, if not bigger, than we have with the Afghans.
So 10 years after the war in Afghanistan began, more than 10 years now, you look back on this and you think we could have done what differently? So we wouldn't be 10 years into this now worried about the neighboring country of Afghanistan, given what's developed there with all the money we've spent and clearly not getting the so-called bang for the buck that we deserve at this point.
Well, but let's remember, there isn't a safe haven for for the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is doing hit and run, but I don't think they're an existential threat, and life is better for the Afghan people, even if it's somewhat uncertain. So we did accomplish some things. Pakistan, I think, is where I feel the greatest disappointment, because after all that we did for Pakistan, the fact that they've not really turned to fighting extremism in the way that they should, a sense that maybe they even turn their eyes a little bit to the extremist problem that they've got inside, that's where I find the disappointment. The Pakistanis need to stop focusing on India and Kashmir, where I don't think the Indians have any intention of wanting to fight them anymore. You know, the Indians want to do Bangalore and Bollywood and get on the Security Council, and Pakistan needs to turn its energies toward the extremists that, after all, killed Benazir Bhutto. It's a Pakistani problem, not just an American one.
When we come back, more with Secretary Rice and your phone calls, 800-876-4123. Her time, of course, in the State Department working with George W. Bush, also National Security Advisor. We have a lot more to get to. Her views on China. Is China poised to change given its economic development and its economic might? We're going to talk about that issue. And also, Christians across the Middle East have suffered greatly in recent years. How has the Arab Spring made that worse for the Christian people? We'll get into that, as well as the president's trip to the G20, as now the common thread in all this news coverage is America and her influence is in decline overseas, around the world. We'll take a break. Condi Rice stays with us on The Laura Ingraham Show.
You're as pretty as a picture.
Libyan rebels getting their hands on more goodies from what some in Libya are calling Gaddafi's Pentagon. The rebels say they found everything from a gold-plated rifle to this photo album. It is Muammar Gaddafi's photo album filled with pictures of the former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice.
Secretary Rice, of course you knew I was going to tease you about that. I mean, that is
that was a little creepy.
You will never ever live that down. I mean, of all things you've done.
Right.
Well, apparently he had several bootleg piano concertos that you had written just for him. No, that can't be. Is that right? I'm just looking at this now. Apparently,
it was very creepy. He'd actually had a little video made with a song that he'd had written called "Black Flower in the White House." And as you might imagine, I got quite a few emails from around the country about that.
Now, did the former president tease you about that at all?
Oh, everybody did, of course.
I can imagine GWB just going, Condi. I mean, he really knows how to pick them, doesn't he? I mean,
it was pretty weird. It really was. But I had to go there and concentrate on what I was doing, which was affirming that he'd given up his weapons of mass destruction, and that was, Laura, a really good thing. After he was in that bunker, I'm pretty sure he would have used them.
Well, last week an Al-Qaeda flag was pictured flying over the courthouse in Benghazi in Libya. Well, of course, the revolution had its strongest and firmest base. So how would you assess the Obama administration's handling of Libya? And then we'll get into the religious minorities question.
Well, I'm really glad that Gaddafi is gone. I don't think we knew terribly much about the rebels, and they probably are a mixed bag. But pretty soon they will have to come to terms with the fact that if they're going to run the country, you can't fly an Al-Qaeda flag and expect anybody to support you. And so they'll have a reckoning, too, about some of this. And I noticed that the person that they actually chose to be prime minister is kind of a technocrat, so that's probably a good sign.
So we've seen 1 million Christians flee Iraq.
Yeah.
We've seen Catholic priests shot, killed during Mass. We've seen people pulled off buses in places like Egypt and shot after they were discovered to be Christians. Do you, in looking at the carnage for Christians and our Jewish brothers and sisters in the Middle East, do you really think the Arab Spring is going to end up being a good thing for religious minorities?
Well, in the short run, it's going to be pretty chaotic, and there are going to be some elements of this that are really pretty awful. And look, I'm deeply Christian myself, and this is really disturbing. And I think we ought to be all over these governments and these leaders to tell them if you want American assistance, then you're going to have to do something about protection of religious minorities. And they're going to have to flat out go out and protect religious minorities. Now, the fact is that authoritarianism isn't stable, and so these regimes were going to go away. That's why we launched the Freedom Agenda. You could see that the Egyptian regime was not long for this world. We tried to get people to reform before their people were in the streets, and then the reform has a less chaotic character, and you can put in place institutions that protect, for instance, religious minorities. But it would be a mistake to think that there was an option to stay with these authoritarian leaders. There wasn't, and now we have to try and make the best of what is going to be a pretty messy transition.
Well, it's certainly a difficult situation, but the idea that an Islamist regime that replaces an authoritarian one is going to be respectful to the rights of Christians, I think that's just pie in the sky thinking. I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't think so, Laura. I think over time there will be a lot of pressure on these regimes to deliver. And to deliver, you have to be respected in and integrated into the international economy and into the international system, and you need America's help. I know that people are saying, we're weakened in this, but we are not without influence. And I can remember a circumstance where Hamid Karzai, the Afghans were going to execute an Afghan who declared himself a Christian. And President Bush said, go call him. So I called up Karzai, and I said, if you do that, you will not see a penny from the United States of America ever again. And he came back and he said, I fixed it. We're going to declare him insane. I said, no, that doesn't work either. And ultimately, they found a way out of that circumstance. So on things like religious freedom, we have to throw our weight around.
Well, we certainly do, and I don't think this administration has been leading in the cause of protecting religious minorities. I think they've been playing catch-up, to say it in a respectful way. Condoleezza Rice, we'll have you back, talk more about China. The book, No Higher Honor. Congrats on the big memoir. We really appreciate your joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Great to be with you and your listeners.